I still remember when The 13th Warrior 1999 came out. While I was still in high school, I watched it twice in the theatre and even bought the VHS tape and watched it so many times that it broke. Then I bought the DVD and also watched it until it broke. My best friend in high school, and I would constantly quote the prayer, "Lo there do I see my father." It wasn't until much later when I rewatched it a few times that I realised The 13th Warrior is not just an adventure film. It is a filmmaking lesson hidden inside the cracking of whips and the sound of horns. On the surface, it looks like a grim Viking film, blood-stained swords, northern fog, growling warriors, and an Arab scholar lost among a barbaric world. But few people know that behind this film is a backstage civil war between the director and the original author. A dark cut that was buried forever. A budget that doubled careers that stalled, and a project once viewed as a Hollywood curse. And ironically, that very failed film has lived longer than many blockbusters of its time, rewatched, requoted and reloved in its own way. And today we are going to open the darkest and strangest backstage doors of The 13th Warrior 1999. 20. When the mother of the Wendol was once just an old ghostly figure. Do you remember the moment when the warriors entered the dark cave where the air was thick with the smell of death and the feeling that they were about to face something that should never be seen? In the original version, that feeling was far more spine-chilling. In director John McTiernan's original cut, the mother of the Wendol was not a fierce female warrior at all. She was an ancient skeletal, almost motionless, being like a statue carved from bone and shadow. The character was played by veteran actress Susan Willis, staying very close to Michael Crichton's original novel, Eaters of the Dead. An ancient female ruler who commands through whispers and primal fear rather than physical strength. The problem arose when test audiences watched the scene of the hero storming into the cave and killing her. The reaction was not satisfaction, but discomfort. The victory looked too cruel, too cold, and most importantly, it did not feel cinematic. There was no climax, no release, just strong men killing a nearly helpless elderly creature. Viewers felt uneasy, and the survey cards said everything. When Crichton returned to take control of the project, he made a key decision: rewrite the depiction. The mother of the Wendol was made younger, more physical, more dangerous. Now played by Kristen Cloak, hidden beneath fur, moving in the dark like a predatory creature. The confrontation then became a genuine battle, more emotionally acceptable for audiences. 19. When real blood was spilled on set. Have you noticed that in some battle scenes, the warrior's eyes are no longer acting but pure survival instinct? There is one such moment in The 13th Warrior, and it began with a sword strike, gone off course. In the middle of a chaotic fight scene where sword clashed against sword and everything was staged to look dangerous but safe. An accident happened. Vladimir Kulich, who played the Viking leader Beowulf, could not dodge in time when a stunt performer's sword slipped from its intended trajectory. The steel blade sliced straight into his hand. Real blood, real pain, and the wound was deep enough to require immediate stitches. Any other film crew would likely have called cut for the entire day. But Kulich did not. He wrapped his hand tightly in leather, hid the bandage beneath his costume, and returned to set as if nothing had happened. He continued acting not for minutes, but for an entire week. The pain made his movements heavier, his gaze sharper, and every sword swing became rough to the point of being frightening. Later, Kulich summed it up in one short sentence: half joking, half serious, Beowulf was bleeding. And so was I. The medical staff objected. The director was forced to adjust camera angles using close-ups and framing to hide the fully bandaged hand. But Kulich's spirit could not be hidden. The entire crew began calling him by a name that never appeared in the script, the real warrior. 18. Ahmad ibn Fadlan is not a fictional character.
He calls for the angel of death.
It may sound like a Hollywood detail added to make the story feel more authentic, but Ahmad ibn Fadlan was real. If you remember the scene where the Arab man stands silently at the riverbank, watching the Vikings perform a funeral ritual with fireblood and wild chanting that is not pure cinematic invention, but the perspective of a real person witnessing a world completely foreign to him. Ahmad ibn Fadlan is not a fictional hero, nor a product of screenwriting. He was an Arab diplomat, scholar and writer who lived in the 10th century. He departed from Baghdad, taking a long and dangerous journey to the land of the Volga Bulgars, the farthest edge of the Islamic world at that time. During that journey, Ibn Fadlan encountered the Vikings, and more importantly, he wrote everything down. The surviving manuscripts describe in detail their ships, living customs, religious rituals, and especially the Viking funeral, a detail that would later become one of the most haunting scenes in the 13th Warrior. In other words, the spine of the film does not come from modern imagination, but from a written account more than 1,000 years old. By contrast, the Wendol and the mother of the Wendol are creations of Michael Crichton. Formed from prehistoric bear worship beliefs, the hypothesis of surviving Neanderthals, and the primal human fear of what is not like us. What is valuable is that the film refuses to draw a clear line between history and myth, just like the real experience of Ibn Fadlan, a rational scholar facing a world too foreign to fully explain. 17. Few films have ever bled money like The 13th Warrior. A film about Viking warriors collapsed not because of an enemy, but because of money. A lot of money. At the start, this was a medium-large-scale project with a budget of around 85 million USD, enough to make a proper Nordic epic. But from that point on, everything slipped out of control. The script was rewritten constantly. Reshoots took place on a large scale. Costs quickly passed the 100 million USD mark, and according to many internal sources, the actual total spending, including marketing and delays, may have reached nearly 160 million USD. Production lasted for years, sets had to be rebuilt, battle scenes reshot, and the edit was heavily reworked under Michael Crichton after test screenings reacted negatively to John McTiernan's original cut. By August 1999, when the film finally reached theatres, the summer box office had already belonged to The Sixth Sense and The Blair Witch Project. While those two films screamed and shocked, The 13th Warrior chose to whisper slow, dark, difficult to approach. The result? 61 million USD worldwide, a number far too small compared to what was spent. From an ambition to become the next great epic, the film turned into a classic lesson about studio panic creative conflict and the cold arithmetic of Hollywood. 16. When the author took the wheel.
Shouldn't we stay closer to land? Oh boy, this is no day to be close to land.
Shouldn't we stay closer to land? Oh boy, this is no day to be close to land. In the film, that is a line about survival, but in real life it almost became a prophecy for the fate of the 13th Warrior. After disastrous test screenings, Disney decided to return to shore-firing John McTiernan and giving control to the author of the original story, Michael Crichton. A shocking move in Hollywood. Authors are almost never allowed to come back and reshape the adaptation of their own work. Crichton did not want a loud adventure film. He ordered massive rewrites, large-scale reshoots, changes to pacing and tone. What he pursued was a slower, more mysterious story with the shape of an anthropological observation where myth and history blur together. Two visions collided head-on. McTiernan made films like Violent Legends, grounded heavy with survival. Crichton saw the film as a record of humans confronting ancient fear. The set turned into a Cold War. The composer was replaced. The editor was replaced. Actors were called back months later. Even Antonio Banderas was unsure which version of the film he was living in. Disney at this point chose to stand aside. No one was truly steering anymore. What reached theatres was a hybrid creature, half McTiernan, half Crichton, and not fully belonging to either of them. 15. There is only one God, and the battle behind the camera.
There is only one God, and Muhammad is his prophet.
There is only one God, and Muhammad is his prophet. The whispered opening line sounds like a quiet oath. But few people know that behind that silence was a film tearing itself apart from losing its direction. The 13th Warrior began as a major gamble, an adaptation of Michael Crichton's Eaters of the Dead with Antonio Banderas at the height of his career. John McTiernan in the director's chair, and a studio ready to spend big. But the dream quickly slipped into nightmare. Script rewrites followed one after another, test screenings received cold reactions, and prolonged reshoots pushed the budget from roughly 80 million USD to over 160 million USD, a number enough to make any boardroom turn pale. The issue was not money alone. Test audiences found the film too dark, too slow, too difficult to grasp. McTiernan pursued a grim, grounded vision, treating myth as raw survival. The studio wanted a bright, marketable epic. Two forces pulling in opposite directions tore the project apart, art versus commerce. On set, crews waited for direction that never arrived. In the editing room, editors disagreed on what the story even was. When chaos reached its peak, executives panicked and attempted to rebrand to hide the cracks, but trust had already evaporated. It was at that moment that Michael Crichton stepped in and took control. From there, the real battle of the 13th Warrior no longer took place inside the Wendol cave, but behind the camera, who tells the story in what voice and what price would be paid for that hesitation. 14. You never truly saw the Wendol. Do you remember? The scene where they raise the torches, the flames flicker, the mist coils, and then something slips across the edge of the frame. Not clearly a person, not an animal, maybe only the shadow of fear brushing your eye before vanishing. That was not accidental. It was John McTiernan's intent. In the 13th Warrior, the Wendol are almost never shown in full. They exist in fog, in trembling torchlight, in fragmented motion. A patch of fur flashing by a shard of bone striking a shield. A scream swallowed by the night before you can determine where it came from. The camera always arrives late, or leaves too early. This effect is built to strike at instinct. McTiernan did not want you to know what the enemy is. He wanted you to doubt your own eyes. Are they supernatural monsters, or simply humans who have fallen off every moral boundary? The film does not answer, and it is precisely that emptiness that becomes the fear. The root of this technique is older than cinema. Norse legend once told of cannibal tribes attacking from the fog, arriving and disappearing with no trace, leaving behind suffocating silence. McTiernan borrowed that exact primal dread, the fear of what you cannot see yet know is very close. 13. One of the most haunting scenes without a drop of blood.
Come check tomorrow.
No, sir. So in Harrogate, Buckley. Will a sheep belong to snake up to steal teeth of 12 horses?
Do you remember the scene where Ahmad sits beside the fire, eyes empty, surrounded by Viking laughter and voices that sound like stones striking stones? A world completely not his. No one hits him. No one holds a knife to his throat. Yet the feeling of being exiled while sitting in the middle of a crowd is suffocating all the same. At first, the Norse language is a wall. Ahmad hears them argue, tease, discuss life and death. Yet everything is just meaningless sound. That is exactly the experience of an outsider. You see their mouths move, emotions flare, but the meaning is out of reach. And because you do not understand, you cannot control anything. Then the film performs a very subtle magic trick. The Norse gradually slides into English as the camera revolves around Ahmad's face. Not because they switch languages, but because Ahmad's ear finally catches the rhythm. That moment feels like an awakening. A world that was foreign suddenly unlocks, and for the first time he can stand inside their circle as a person, not as luggage being carried along. In a film full of slaughter and monsters, this is the first real victory, and it is frightening because it reminds us before you fight, you must understand. Those who do not understand the language are usually the first to die. 12. Ahmad brings a different weapon, faith. Surely, when you watched The 13th Warrior, you could not help noticing that moment amid the clash of steel and screams tearing through the wind when the camera suddenly glides past a figure bowing so low he almost disappears, then blends back into the chaos. Among warriors who worship strength and death, Ahmad does not draw his sword first. He prays. John McTiernan kept this command to the very end. No matter how crowded, dark or shaking the frame is, Ahmad must be seen, bowing his head, even if only for a single breath. That is the red thread that survived every rewrite, reshoot and argument. That gesture is not a moral declaration nor a sermon. It is inner discipline. In a world where value is measured by steel and by the number of bodies that fall, Ahmad brings another order, the order of meaning. His faith does not soften the battle, it keeps the person standing inside it, and because of that, prayer becomes armor. It does not reflect fire, it does not block swords, but it keeps a person from losing himself when mudblood and fear swallow everything else. In The 13th Warrior, it is the only weapon that does not need sharpening and never chips. 11. Inside the darkness of the Wendol cave. There is a very strange moment in the film when fear does not come from a roar, but from silence. When the warriors step deeper into the Wendol cave, what they find is not monsters leaping out of the dark, but evidence. Human skulls carved into masks, animal hides sewn into ceremonial armor, and bear pelts draped over human bodies not for warmth, but for transformation. This discovery flips the entire story. The Wendol are not creatures born of myth. They are humans who consciously chose to become beasts, not cursed, not mutated, but a choice, a religious choice. McTiernan borrowed material from ancient legends about prehistoric bear-worshipping cult tribes that believed wearing the skin of the animal would grant them its strength, invincibility, and the right to dominate. In that world, humans do not worship gods, they become gods through blood and ritual. The horror lies there. The Wendol do not fight to protect villages or a future. They fight to preserve the extinction of themselves, a brutal loop made sacred. And so, two value systems stand face to face in the same space. The Vikings fight to protect a community. The Wendol fight to protect their belief that they are above humanity. 10. Each Viking warrior carries a different past on his back.
Wait. Thunder.
Waves make thunder. The thunder cliffs.
Surf.
Do you remember the moment when the whole group stands together before charging into the fog torchlight sweeping across their backs, and each back telling a different story through metal fur, bone and dirt? The haunting power of the 13th Warrior lies here. The Viking warriors do not wear a uniform. McTiernan turns costume into biography. The man wrapped in fur and bone is not doing it just to look fierce. It is how he declares he lives by hunting and killing. The one wearing chainmail and strange metal accessories carries the feeling of someone who has travelled far, collided with other civilizations, and brought back whatever was most useful. On screen, you do not need lengthy dialogue. Just by looking at their backs, you can guess who was once a mercenary, who was a pirate, and who survived battles far from home. This detail also has a very real historical backbone. Norsemen did serve as mercenaries in the Byzantine army, especially in the Varangian Guard period. And that unit itself is recorded as being multi-origin, bringing with it highly mixed equipment and cultural influence. So when the light glides across those patchworked pieces of armour, it is not only metal flashing, it is the past flashing. And that is what makes them look dangerous, not because they look the same, but because each man is a living map of conquests that have already happened. 9. The number 13. Not a coincidence. Remember that moment when they stood in a circle, each man stepping forward, placing his hand on his weapon, and then the eyes stopped on the outsider. When the name Ahmad ibn Fadlan was called, it was not just to fill a roster, it was the closing of a ritual. In Norse mythology, King Helgi Hallkraki had 12 elite warriors bound by blood and oath. Among them stood out Bödvar Bjarki, a warrior believed to possess the spirit of a bear symbol of primal strength. Many scholars argue that Bjarki and Beowulf are simply two reflections of the same myth, the hero who carries the animal instinct to protect the community. The 13th warrior did not fabricate that number. The film restores the sacred circle Beowulf, and 12 warriors form the ancient structure of the myth. And when the 13th man arrives, he does not break the circle, he completes it. Ahmad ibn Fadlan is the outsider. Different language, different faith, different worldview. For that reason, his role goes beyond fighting. He is the witness, the listener, the recorder. In storytelling tradition, a legend only lives long when someone tells it to the outside world. The number 13 here is therefore not an omen, it is a function. 8. Before it was called the 13th Warrior, it was Eaters of the Dead, and the curse began in the editing room. Imagine this situation. A film has already been shot. The music has been written. The edit is complete, but after the test screening, audiences walk out with the 3 words, a studio fear's most confusing, slow, not fun. And suddenly the title, Eaters of the Dead, begins to feel like a bad omen. The original version belonged to John McTiernan, the man who had just made Die Hard and Predator. McTiernan wanted to tell a Viking legend in a chilling, realistic style, less showy, more silence, more mud, more brute survival. What he aimed for was almost like a fake documentary about myth. You are not told it is frightening. You must smell the fear. But Hollywood does not run on artistic intent. It runs on mainstream audience reaction. When test screenings failed, the studio panicked because a film like that is very hard to sell. Not enough rhythm, not enough climax, not enough punch. And that was when Michael Crichton, author of the original novel, and also a producer, stepped in like a second driver grabbing the wheel. He did not tweak anything. He tore it apart and rebuilt it, rewrote scenes, reshot large portions, replaced the score, changed the pacing, even altered the emotional direction and the ending. Crichton's goal was clearer. Turn it into adventure, suspense, easy to digest with a pulp feeling. And so the editing room became a battlefield. Every cut was a bending of meaning. Every reassembly changed the heartbeat of the film. The final product released in theatres was not simply bad or good in a straight line, it was a patchwork of tug-of-war. In one scene you feel cold myth, and in the next, it suddenly feels like a hot-blooded adventure film. 7. The man standing between two worlds. Do you remember that moment when Ahmad ibn Fadlan stood silent in the circle of Viking warriors? Firelight thrown across a face both fearful and curious, the moment he realised he was no longer a diplomat but had stepped into a world where none of his familiar rules mattered anymore. Antonio Banderas was never the studio's safe choice to play Ahmad ibn Fadlan. The executive board wanted more familiar names. Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, even Val Kilmer faces that guaranteed box office returns, easy to market, easy to mould into an action hero. But John McTiernan refused to compromise. He needed a man who didn't just know how to swing a sword, but someone who could carry alienation on his shoulders. A scholar thrown into a world of violence, honour and rituals born from blood. For McTiernan, Banderas had something the others did not: the internal intensity of someone who observes before he acts. Banderas prepared for the role more like a researcher than a movie star. He trained, physically learned to speak lines using Arabic phonetics, studied Islamic customs, and worked with historians. Advisors later remarked that he looked exactly like a scholar lost among warriors, not because he was weak, but because he was different. 6. A foundation built on Beowulf. The roots of the 13th warrior come directly from Beowulf, the oldest surviving epic in English literature, a tale of heroes, monsters, and humanity's most primal fears. Michael Crichton didn't retell Beowulf in the traditional sense. He asked a deeply scientific question. What would happen if Beowulf were real and someone from the outside had witnessed it? That outsider is Ahmad ibn Fadlan, a real 10th century Arab diplomat whose surviving manuscripts contain detailed accounts of the Norse tribes he encountered. Crichton fused two worlds that seemingly could never coexist: the scholarly analytical mind of the Islamic world with the superstition, violence and myth of ancient Scandinavia. The result is a hybrid narrative, part anthropology, part horror, part legend, where the monster might indeed be supernatural, or might simply be a human consumed by darkness. And that is exactly where Hollywood stumbled. No one in the studio knew how to market the film. Was it a creature feature, a historical epic, or an academic-tinged adventure that identity crisis haunted the entire production and shaped every battle fought behind the camera? Yet ironically, it is that very premise, a scholar documenting a savage world, that makes the 13th Warrior unlike any other sword and sandals film of its era. Crichton once described it as a bridge between civilization and chaos. 5. When Crichton took control, even the music became a casualty. It sounds unbelievable, but when Michael Crichton returned and seized control of the film, the first thing to be sacrificed wasn't a scene. It was the music. Composer Graham Revell had already completed a full original score for the 13th Warrior. His music was dark, heavy and austere, built on Nordic chants, primitive drum rhythms and a glacial atmosphere. It matched John McTiernan's vision perfectly. The film was meant to feel like an ancient legend dug up from the ice, not a Hollywood adventure marching toward triumph. But that wasn't the story Crichton wanted to tell. He wanted more emotion, more melody, something that clearly declared who the hero is. To him, the score shouldn't drown the audience in bleakness, it should lift them. So a decision was made. Revell was removed even though his score was fully finished. His replacement, Jerry Goldsmith, a titan of film music. Goldsmith entered the project in emergency mode, tasked with rewriting nearly the entire score in a drastically short time. What audiences hear today is his work battle sequences, with triumphant brass Viking warriors draped in heroic identity and Ibn Fadlan framed with elegant noble strings. Viewers heard a victory anthem. What they never heard was an entire other soundtrack, Colder Stranger, and now buried forever alongside the version of the film the world was never allowed to see. 4. The rumours of a lost McTiernan cut. For years, fans of the 13th Warrior have whispered about another version, one said, to be 5-10 minutes longer, slower, darker, and truer to director John McTiernan's original vision. According to the rumours, that cut spent more time on the politics between Viking tribes, expanded the cultural conflict Ahmad must navigate, and even included a faint thread of intimacy between Ahmad and a northern noblewoman. Not Hollywood romance, but something quieter, a fragile understanding between two worlds. Then, Michael Crichton took over. Those veins of story vanished. He rewrote sequences, reshot the climax, and altered dialogue to pivot the film from anthropological horror into heroic adventure. Faster pacing, clearer arcs, more sellable. And in the process, the McTiernan material was stripped away like a sediment layer, no longer allowed to surface. But traces remain in old trailers, in behind-the-scenes photos, in a few glimpses of deleted battle shots. And most hauntingly, in a quiet farewell between Ahmad and the surviving warriors, a moment that barely speaks, yet says everything McTiernan cared about. For years, fans have tried to stitch these fragments together, giving the Phantom version a name, Eaters of the Dead, Director's Cut. Does it exist? No one knows. But like the Wendol in the film itself, the greatest fear lies in what you cannot see, a version half legend, half memory, swallowed by time but never truly gone. 3. The long aftershocks. After the 13th warrior, there was a strange heaviness in the air, as if everyone involved walked away carrying something they didn't want to remember. Almost no one who touched this film came out of it unscathed. For John McTiernan, it marked the beginning of a true downward slide. His career never returned to the peak of Die Hard or Predator. What followed were financial troubles, then the infamous wiretapping scandal that shook Hollywood as if everything collapsed on him at once. Michael Crichton, meanwhile, retreated completely. After the 13th Warrior, he never directed again. It was as though he'd reached a quiet conclusion: some battles are simply not worth fighting. Even Antonio Banderas, who at the time was rising steadily with film after film, hit a strange, unspoken plateau. Not a fall, but a noticeable loss of momentum. The film's failure made studios wary of historical epics for years. Projects like Kingdom of Heaven or Troy later had to fight tooth and nail just to get greenlit. Hollywood walked away with a bitter lesson. Blending myth with realism is a minefield. One wrong step and everything can blow. 2. Peter Menzies Jr. and the nightmare etched onto celluloid. Remember that feeling when the screen darkens, fire blooms against the night, and you're no longer sure whether you're watching a film or wandering into an ancient memory? That is exactly what Peter Menzies Jr. carved into the 13th Warrior. Daylight in this film is never truly day. Menzies washes everything in steel blue and cold grey, making the North feel like a place that doesn't belong to human beings. Sky Earth. Water, all of it carries a quiet hostility, as if nature itself is watching the characters with suspicion. This is not a landscape meant to be conquered. It's a landscape meant to be endured. When night falls, the palette flips. Torchlight erupts. Coals burn red, slicing into a darkness thick like soil. The warriors' faces appear and vanish in rhythm with burning wood, sometimes human, sometimes spectres. McTiernan wanted the North to feel alien even to those born from it, and Menzies turned that intention into pure visual language. Shot in the brutal wilderness of British Columbia, the camera refuses to hide the cold steam curling from breath frost clinging to animal fur. Firelight trembling inside exhausted eyes. These tiny physical truths make the legend feel less like fantasy and more like a fevered memory someone once lived through. The result is a film where even the lighting takes sides and darkness always has the advantage. 1. When The 13th Warrior stumbled into theatres, critics were ready to draw their blades. When The 13th Warrior limped into theatres, critics didn't wait to see whether it could stand. They swung first. Roger Ebert gave it a mere 1.5 stars, describing the viewing experience as slightly unpleasant to sit through slaughter after slaughter, only to end in a kind of pious conclusion. Variety was even colder, calling it a blood-soaked yet lifeless tale of men with rusty swords and dull tunics. Entertainment Weekly delivered The Killing Blow, an expensive roar but without a soul. The issue wasn't just the quality. The marketing campaign promised a sweeping Hollywood epic, but many audiences felt as if they were watching two films wrestling inside the same frame, one a shadowed ancient myth, the other a clean-cut heroic adventure forced into the light. And yet, not everyone swung their blades. The Washington Post called the film the guilty pleasure of the season, praising its primal roughness and tactile physicality. Some critics highlighted Antonio Banderas' restrained performance, arguing that his quiet intensity is what kept the chaos from collapsing entirely. So what about you? Which moment from The 13th Warrior, 1999, is the one you remember most? Leave a comment. And if you want to continue unlocking other deleted scenes from Hollywood's golden age, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. You will be surprised by what Hollywood has kept hidden from you for decades.